In a previous video, we looked at the difference between a castle and a fort. We came to the conclusion that a castle has more than just one purpose. For example, it's used for defence, as well as showcasing wealth and power, and often is seen as a centre for administration. Forts, however, were just intended to be made for defence. However, what's the difference between a castle and a palace? England's most famous palace is undoubtedly Buckingham Palace, the royal residence where the Queen lives in London. However, you never call this place Buckingham Castle, so what's the difference? Join us as we explore the differences between castles and palaces. To support the channel, please make sure to subscribe. When hearing the word castle and palace, chances are you'll imagine the same sort of thing, a rather large stone building with towers, turrets, gatehouses and crenellations and so on. However, they are slightly different. Previously, by looking at castles, we saw that they maintained the primary defensive and protective element for the monarch, or the person who's building the castle. An example of this is Dover Castle, built under the orders from Henry II, and it was built in order to protect England from invasion and to safeguard passage from the English Channel. The south coast of England, where Dover is found, is the gateway to Europe when leaving Britain today, as ferries run constantly. So even during the medieval times, there was a fear that if an invasion would happen from Europe, the invaders would land in Dover, hence why a castle was built on a high piece of land to overlook the English Channel and defend the country. Castles over time transitioned into grand residence for the royalty, being symbols of wealth too, where grand riches would be displayed aimed to impress guests at parties. However, their defensive element was maintained. England's Queen Elizabeth II lives today in Buckingham Palace, however one of her favoured royal residences is Windsor Castle. During the Second World War, the royal family decided that Windsor Castle would be a safer place for the princesses Elizabeth and Margaret to stay, away from the Blitz in central London. However, when there was an air raid close to the castle, the Queen would retreat into the underground dungeons for protection, so medieval castles could even offer safety from Luftwaffe bombs, so castles are still defensive and protective structures, but are used for grandeur also. Palaces, however, have no defensive purposes at all. They're meant purely for showing off. This showing off wasn't to be done in small amounts too. Palaces were made for taking the breath away of visiting guests and dignitaries, showcasing the complete wealth and taste of the monarchy. Palaces in history have been used as a place to show off the spoils of war, expensive jewellery and artefacts and so on. Expect to find huge rooms with ornate decor, massive banqueting halls and great halls, gilded tables and so on. Palaces contain hundreds of rooms, all of which have amazing decoration, showing off the opulence of the royalty. Kings and queens would later on shun castles and palaces, and would give castles to other nobles or ministers. As time progressed, the monarchy stopped needing defensive buildings such as castles because of the shifting technology used in warfare. After the 18th century, castle renovation and building in the UK intended on really making the buildings look fancy and grand rather than maintaining defences. There is a military aspect in palaces though. However, these are mostly linked to the guarding of entrances to the grounds, such as beefeaters or the guards at Buckingham Palace. There are some features you won't find at a palace that are found in castles though. You won't find thick curtain walls here, you won't find moats and so on. The first palaces were built on Palatine Hill in the Roman times, hence where the word comes from, and these were rather large imperial opulent buildings meant to be lived in by the emperor or the extremely rich. There are a few interesting cases to look at though. One of these is Bolsover Castle. This fortification sits on a huge hill and does feature many defensive features, however its main intention when being built was purely to showcase wealth. When also walking around here, you don't get a sense of Bolsover being any good for keeping out enemies during a siege or so on, but you do see great grandeur and wealth. The little keep that sits within the grounds encompasses this, with amazing paintings on the walls and also feats of architecture inside. But why don't we call this Bolsover Palace? Probably due to the fact that it isn't linked to royalty and never has been explicitly linked to a king or queen. Another interesting case to consider is Warwick Castle. In England, it is one of the most famous, if not the most visited castle in the country. It's a rather amazing place to visit, seeing huge towers, thick curtain walls and so on. It's also massive and has all the features of a castle you'd expect to see. Initially, a Motte and Bailey castle was present at Warwick, but as time developed it shifted towards being more of a country house, or what some could consider a palace. The castle's purpose shifted dramatically from defence to showing off wealth and money, with a series of wealthy earls and members of the Greville family who own the castle. But today, it's very much a palace. If you venture inside the Great Hall, you'll see showcases of wealth with amazing armour, paintings, decoration and so on. The main part of the castle features grand Victorian rooms which centre around rich decor, and this has nothing to do with defence. Warwick Castle is an interesting one to look at. It's certainly a castle on the exterior, however on the interior it's certainly palatial. However, yet again, royalty only visited here on the odd occasion, and it's never had any explicit links to the recent monarchy. So to sum up, castles are defensive fortifications and palaces are not. Yes, castles can be ornate and grand and show off the wealth of the castle's owner, but they still maintain the defensive or protective element as their primary purpose. Palaces, on the other hand, have never been and never will be this, and will never be used for defence, being only a place for royalty to live and stay and to entertain guests, amazing them with the royalty's treasure and wealth. Once again, thank you for watching. To support the channel, please make sure to subscribe. Once again, thanks for watching.